Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank Microsoft for the invitation. I work at the Brazilian National Institute for Space Research, and we are doing some very exciting programs, some very exciting projects, and that's more or less what I'd like to talk to you about today. Actually, the title of the presentation is a little bit misguiding, maybe. I'm going to talk about what we are doing with INPE. We have lots and lots of data, and we have more data than we actually know what to do with them. And we are working on some outreach and some citizen science projects besides the traditional science that's being made. I'd like to talk some possibilities and actually some partnership that we have with Johns Hopkins University, with Alex Zale's group on the physics and astronomy department that led to some ideas that I'm going to present today. So, as I told you, we have lots of data. INPE is the institute in Brazil that's under the Ministry of Science and Technology. It's a federal-funded institute that we are supposed to get data about the environment in general and work on civilian space applications, remote sensing. We have astrophysics groups. We have a lot of environmental scientists, climate scientists, meteorologists. We have a lot of people working with large data sets. And we also have some people working on climate predictions. So we have also modeling people. So that's basically the missions institute. The institute's mission is that. And we are supposed also to get this data, not only to do the research, but also to give to the public so the public can use, not only the normal public, but industries and farmers and other local governments. They are supposed to get the data and analysis from INPE to use on their applications. So mainly, I work with the groups that are supposed to collect data, store data, and sometimes put the data to other people can use. Some examples of the data that we have at INPE. We have, these are actually screenshots from some servers, some web servers that we have. We have a lot of Landsat images, historical images from since Landsat 5. We have all of them cataloged. We have them pre-processed so users can get information from a certain period on time with or without clouds or in any kind of set that they want to get the data. And we also have data from the Cyber satellite. That's a partnership with the Chinese government. And we also you have all this data, and any user can just go on the website, register, and get the data for free. That's from remote sensing images. We also have sensors that collect and store lightning and other kind of phenomena related with electricity on the atmosphere. So we have a huge database that points if the latitude and longitude and the exact timestamp whenever they had lightning in Brazil. You can also get this data, and on this side you can see the data. On the right side, that's a simulation. That's also a process version of the data that says more or less the probability of a range of lightning storms. So we have the data, and we have products based on the data. These are also simulations. We have forecast models. So we have this kind of, we are the clearinghouse for weather model and data, and we will just use that for weather prediction. So you can go to INPE sites and get a lot of information about whether it's going to rain or it's going to the temperature, and the newspapers use this information. That's one of the parts of the mission of the institute, just give the information so people can use it. We also have some groups working with space weather. First time I heard about that was very strange, but space weather is more or less the idea that you're getting information from emissions from the sun that can affect GPS and other kind of communications. So we have a group that monitors that, and they have analysis, and these are two products that you also can get on INPE's website about the space weather. One is about the electric content on the atmosphere, and the other one is about the occurrence of scintillation that happens when you have a lot of rays. I don't really understand the physics of that. But we collect and store, and sometimes we distribute all this data. And most of the data is public. You can just go to the website, and in most cases, you don't even have to identify yourself. You can just see the data. You can play with the browser. There are several really good-looking tools for that. And we have, for each mission, we call it, for the remote sensing people, from the astronomical, the space weather people, we have this kind of group working on getting the data and putting on the website. The problem is that the missions were structured in a way that people can get the data and put in the most beautiful way so people can use that. So it's websites and the data distribution projects were initially thought to attend people that want to see the data. But in some cases, we don't have access to the raw data. For example, I'm going to give you some examples. If I want to do something that's not, it wasn't thought about when they started to do the missions, and they didn't do that on an interface on the web so I can get the data over a map or in a time series, then I don't have access to that. But I know that they have the data. It's on our servers in some place. So one of the missions that our small computer science, mostly computer science people, want to do is how can we allow people, I say that non-scientists, but actually we have a lot of scientists that want to play with the data. But they don't want to play with the data where they can get on the website. They want to get the raw data to run their own algorithms, to do their own visualizations, and we're not prepared for that when we started to do all this several years ago, actually. So how can we do that, and how can we know what people want from the data? On the other hand, we can just put the data on our FTP site, but we won't have any control. We don't have any interaction with that. We are trying to look for a way to let people play with the data with some kind of control, not to restrict them, but just to know what they're doing with the data. One of the first prototypes we did about that is about the CPTEC and PCDs project. PCDs are data collecting platforms. They have huge drums with some electronics and some sensors. They had, I think we have 4,000 of those all over Brazil. And this data is collected in a huge database. Each PCD has several sensors, so I can check, for example, I can check how much rained in a certain city in a certain period of time. They have a very good web interface for that, where I can search for any information that I want. It's really user-friendly. And if I want, for example, a time series of precipitation, of rainfall, I can just say the name of the city, and I want from this date to that date, and I'm going to get a lot of pages like that one on the right side, when you see that the date and how much it rained. It's accumulated precipitation. And it's very interesting. A lot of people use that just to see, okay, it rained yesterday or not. But then we notice that if I want to work on a study, for example, for a historic precipitation similarity between two cities, I can get the information. The information is there. But I'm going to do a lot of cut and paste and reformatting if I really need this data in a raw form. And these are actually two time series. They are on the database. If I'm close to the database, I can just select and get this data. But I only have people outside of the institute, only have the web interface. This is an example of application that we wanted to do for a long time. And it was surprisingly easy to do as long as we get the data in a format that we want. This is the state of São Paulo. Each of these points have a PCD, have a data collection platform that collects rainfall information. Some of these PCDs have more than 30 years old, and some of them are not actually electronic at all. They have the data that was collected manually. For example, for São Paulo City, we have 105 years of data that people started collecting manually, and they digitized that, and it's on a database. So we have this kind of virtual collection platforms. Anyway, what we wanted to do is that we noticed that rainfall should have some patterns. Accumulated rainfall should have some patterns. And we get some very strange patterns when we check the historic data, meaning that probably the sensor was broken or there was something wrong. So one of our grad students needed to check, I think it's a streak of 84 months for each PCD or rainfall, and to see whether it was more or less similar to one PCD that was close geographically. This is one of the visualizations that this guy did. Similar plots, similar colors, mean that the time series were more or less similar on the Euclidean distance. And there are some points that they are not behaving as we expected. Some points over here and in other points. Anyway, it's just a very simple task. But it was impossible to do if this guy just got the web interface. In this case, we cheated and asked for the database itself. And the guy just gave us a huge database, and we have in a local copy, we can play with that. But a lot of people got interested on that, and they wanted to do that for their state or for different periods of time. And if they use this interface, they are going to use a lot of copy, paste, and sometimes they don't even know if they have the data they need. So this is the main motivation. We got a small project, we got funding for 2 students to develop that. So we started to get this data through web services. We don't want to change anything that's going on the original site, on the original database. We just get a small hole with a website that can do a SQL query and get result back. And that's what we are looking forward to do with this kind of data. And actually, CPTEC has a very interesting mission. They have they call it a user support center. When they get all kinds of calls of people asking for information they can't find on the web service, on the websites of the institute. These are some of the questions that we get. Actually, some of these questions are a little bit changed because we want to use them as prototypes. We started to order the questions that we got using the idea of 20 questions that I think Jim Gray and Alex Zaley started to think about when they started playing with that SDSS database and system for astronomy imaging data, is that we have some questions that are really easy to answer. And you can just go to a website and try for yourself. And we have some questions that if you give you the access to the data, you can develop some tools that you can easily answer that. And we have some questions that probably you can't answer that unless we give you the whole database and you have a quite powerful computer. So we are still, on this project, we are still trying to organize the questions in order of you can do that and let's do that together. These are some of the questions. Some of the questions have strange histories behind that. One of these questions, I'm not sure exactly which one, was a bet between 2 mayors of 2 cities because my city is better than your city because your city rains all the time, and they have this kind of friendly bet, and they call it the center, and the center say, okay, guys, I can give you the data and you decide by yourselves. But we are thinking about that if we let people play with the data, we just give them access to the data, not the whole database, but constrained access to the data, they can get all kind of information, answer all kind of questions that even CPTEC people haven't thought about. And they don't really have the manpower to just develop all kind of interfaces to answer these kind of questions. So we have this small prototype project. That's what we plan to do. It's a really simple sketch. I'm using metadata on the sense of do we have the data and which kind of data is that. It's not really something formal. We need a lot of information on coverage because we don't have data for all points in the time and also in space. So we are starting to play with that, and we already have some very simple prototypes. Actually, I think the first one, we have a demonstration on that. It's very simple, but it's something that if you decide to do just going to the web page of the institute, you're going to waste a lot of time. How are you going to do that? Right now, we are working on this kind of metadata on the most simple sense of do we have the data for certain location in certain period of time. We are going to work that to create a coverage map. Say, okay, if I want to study, for example, São Paulo State, I can get the data from this period and that period about that sensor. And it's going to be, we are going to have that quite soon. We don't want to do data replication. Right now, we are using a copy of the database because the owners of the database, the IT people that works with the database, they are understandably a little bit concerned about we playing the data in the database directly. So we want to have a copy of the database and show that's possible and that's easy and that's not going to compromise the original infrastructure. As long as we have this proof of concept, they are just going to adapt that so we can run that on a huge database that millions of samples of data. And also inspired by the people at Johns Hopkins developed the SDSS, MyDB, and Casrob's technologies. We are going to use these ideas so people can just run SQL queries and have local databases close to the real database with the data and get to play with all kinds of data access modes, data access interfaces. They can develop web services that collect the data, do something. They can, if we can do it, they can create local database with subsets of the original database. And in the future, we know that they are going to run data-intensive queries on the database that they don't really want to have this internet traffic. They just want to run the code close to the data. And we are drawing a lot of experience of the Johns Hopkins guys to make that work. So that's the first part. We have a lot of data, and also we could use some help to play with this data. I'm going to present two very simple, actually they're not really simple. One of them is interesting. We have simple applications of data processing, data analysis that people really need to, at one point, they really need to look at the data and take a decision. Daniel is one of the students, the grad students on the remote sensing program. And he have this, it's a little bit hard to see, but they have this program where they have to, this project where they have to go to the interior of Brazil, the countryside, in a car. They call it a rally. It's like the Paris-Dakar rally, but very slow and with a lot of cows. They have to go on the countryside of Brazil and measure a lot of information about pasture quality. They get sampling of the grasses. They get a lot of interview with the farmers. They get official information, but they really need to do something that's on the site. And one of the information they get on this kind of rallies, they take 2 to 3 weeks, and they get back to institute, and after some months, they go again. One of the information they get, it's a lot of pictures of the pasture from above. It's, they say that it's a local remote sensing because it's on-site, and they just put a camera inside of being a satellite in orbit. It's a camera 3 meters high and just taking pictures of the ground. We think that this is a possible case for a small-scale citizen science. Sorry. These are some sample pictures that they have when they do this kind of study. They get a lot of these pictures, and they just get some analysts to check on the pictures and see whether they can find points of interest. Actually, it's an occurrence of objects of interest. For example, they have different kinds of pasture. They have dead pasture that's not good for the cows. They have tall grass that's very good for the cows, and they have a lot of termite mounds. They have a lot of stuff going on, and they do this sampling, and they want to quantize that. They use this tool called sample point. For each picture that they have 36 sample points, and one of the analysts just go there and say, I can see this and this and this, and they get this very rough estimate, quantitative analysis of the soil of the places they visited. For this year, they have more or less, they are going to have, probably already have 3,700 images, each one with 36 points, where the people must choose a category and say whether they see something or not on the image. Each one of these experts takes more or less 2 minutes to label the 36 points in one image. So we have more or less 120 hours of effort, because you only have 5 guys in the institute doing that, and they don't do that full time. But anyway, it's the detection of some objects sometimes is difficult, but they are just close together, and they can decide, oh, this is this kind, this is invasive plant or not. But anyway, it's something that they do frequently. They do that every year. But it's not something that is really time-consuming. But they can try to do that. If you could try to do that on a citizen science project in a very small scale, not something that we can just put on Zooniverse so we can get hundreds of thousands of people, but in a very small scale, if you can get, for example, 100 volunteers playing with this data, we could get the answers very quickly. Okay, 120 hours, no, it's not that a long time. But we are thinking about getting more people involved on that. The problem is that it's not really interesting to look at grass and say, okay, I see grass, I see a hole, and I see that grass. So it's something that we are trying to figure out how we can get people to cooperate with this kind of effort. And of course, this project is very strict. It's very narrow in the sense of being a very specific application. We have a lot of projects in INPE that are like that people can get the data, and they need, for example, 2,000 to less than 5,000 hours to analyze the data, but we only have 4 or 5 grad students working on that. So we are starting to think about how can we play with a small-scale citizen science project. That's one of the points that we are starting to investigate there. Another project that we have is related to deforestation of the Amazon forest. Actually, deforestation of the Amazon forest is a very hot issue. And the group that's playing with that, we decided that we don't really want to think about quantitative deforestation. Quantitative deforestation is something that's defined by the institute, by an expert group, and they decide that what is deforestation or not. But as soon as they decide that, Maria Isabel, she's doing a very interesting research on that. She got the maps generated from deforestation. This map, the white part means forest, actually, and the brown part means deforestation. It's a binary image. And that's for 1997, 2006. Isabel is very interested, not on the deforestation itself, but how the deforestation patterns change. And she has this kind of typology that she said that is very, very ad hoc. She decided on that, consulting with some people that understand the patterns, and they get this kind of information that when I get this kind of binary image, I can just cut it in 10 square kilometers tiles, and I can try to search in a table which kind of pattern can I see. We have some diffuse patterns that means very small regions that were cut down, usually small farms, and they say that's unorganized occupation. And you have linear occupations that mean that's probably a road over there. So people are starting to cut the forest close to the road because it's better for them. And we have geometric patterns. Actually, we have more than these 6 types of pattern. But anyway, Isabel tries not only to figure out which kind of pattern we have, because from the kind of pattern, we can understand a little bit more about the usage of the land. For example, the geometric pattern means somebody's cutting large areas. It's either a large farm or a grazing, or for grazing. And these patterns change on time. The top figure means, it's a sample that one student did, trying to use artificial intelligence algorithms to get information on these binary images, to get this kind of classification of which kind of pattern the tile represents. But Isabel is also very interested on the difference, she called it the trajectory. The changes every year on the pattern means that things are going on there, and some of these things are very unsurprisingly common. For example, if you have a large patch of occupation, it's going to be consolidated. It's going to get large, and at some time you're not going to have any forests except for small botches. But some of these patterns are unexpected, and that's what she wants to discover. The problem is that if you get the legal Amazon rainforest and cut that in small 10 by 10 kilometer tiles, we are going to have 2 million tiles for 1 year, and we have 12 years of data. So we have a lot of tiles, and these tiles must be labeled manually. Even if we decide to do larger areas that we don't think it's a good idea, we are going to have 3 million tiles for 10 years, something like that. So it's too much for the analysts. They were started to do something like manual labeling and then using a supervised classification algorithm to try to derive classification for the other tiles, but it's too much information. So in the classes also, that's a problem. These classes are fuzzy. They are not really crisp. We have a lot of information, for example, that diffuse grows into linear, and geometric may grow into consolidated. But even so, even the experts, when they look at one of these tiles, they say, okay, this is a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So the classes are not, the segments of the classes are not clear. They're not crisp. They're fuzzy. So we had an idea for a project, and we submitted that to Zooniverse. And we got some good reviews, but anyway, it wasn't selected, and we are going to submit that again this year. We really want to get a small area of land that we know in Brazil, that we have a lot of strange patterns going on there, and we want to get that to the users so we can get votes and opinions and see whether this fuzziness is possible to be derived, and just get more data than we can get with just a bunch of grad students. And finally, wish list. Actually, it's a wish list of things that we haven't started doing that, but we will. We are very interested on doing that. One problem that we have an ad hoc group. It's 3 computer science guys. We have 4 guys in the remote sensing department, and we have 3 grad students. But we need to organize that, try to tackle the problems that we can really solve. So that's what we're doing right now. That's I'm supposed to go back. In my institute, you are supposed to do research and development. But it's much better. Life is much easier if you do that on an institutional research and development project. It's kind of an inner project. We must have a chart and what we're doing. We have to organize a small group on that. So far, we're just playing around. We need to get more grad students. We have grad programs in my institute in computer science, astronomy, remote sensing, climate, meteorology, and another one, space engineering. We need to get more people, more groups to work with that together for these goals. And we have to organize also our view of this stuff. We have to think about open data and open protocols and open everything instead of trying to develop local solutions. And finally, Brazil have more than 80 million internet users. We have more than 20 million smartphone users all over the country. Some schools, from second grade schools, they are starting to use tablets, cheap tablets instead of textbooks. We have a lot of people that spend a lot of time in computers, sometimes doing things like Facebook. And can we harness this power? Can we try to do something that's interesting to these people so they are going to waste just 5 minutes of their lives every day to check some forests or play with some data or help with something? We are really trying to think a way to do that. Brazil hosts every year, locally, and of course in every school, mathematics Olympics. It's a kind of a general quiz test. And astronomy Olympics, where the students, K-12 students get, actually not K-12, but the first and second year grade students get this kind of quizzes, whether they understand something basic about astronomy. And it's sort of the things that the schools are very involved on. We would really like to play with these people to get something interesting so the kids could play and collaborate with citizen science in any way. My institute also promotes every year the Science and Technology Week. It's a Science, Technology, and Innovation Ministry. And the Science Technology Week is something very interesting that I really enjoy doing. We are supposed to get out of the institute. For most researchers, it's very scary getting out of the institute and talk to the public. Some people are really scared of that, but it's something interesting. You go to a school and you have to explain to a 10-year-old that you're doing something interesting without any weird equations or without any jargon. So it's something that we want to do, but we want to do something beyond that. We want to give a challenge for the students and say, okay, help me doing that. You're going to be scientists for a day. And we are not going to be able to do this year, but next year we are going to have a team to do that. We have some contacts with some schools, local schools in my city. And that's basically the idea. So it's what we do, what we want to do, and what we are going to do as soon as we get the chance. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rafael. Questions? Yes.
Nice talk. Thank you. Did you mention how big your data sets were? I don't know if you, or I missed it because I wasn't.
Which kind of data set?
Initially, when you start any of the data sets you're working with, I'm just kind of curious what big data means to
okay,
you.
I can't say that's big data. They say that's scary data. It's large enough that I don't want to tackle that without any good support. For example, for remote sensing image, we have probably 150 terabytes of remote sensing images, but we don't really have an idea how to play with that all at once. So we do, every research project that I help, they do this slicing either on time or on space. But if you want really to see, the Amazon rainforest covers 227 Landsat images. Each image band is I can try to do a calculation on that, but it's more data that you can store in a local server.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just kind of getting some ballpark of gigabytes, terabytes.
I think the larger data set is like that, 150. There are larger data sets on simulation, but they are temporal data sets. They run the simulations, they run the models, and after that, I think they just get the parameters, but they erase the raw data.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one. So in part of your talk, you spoke about kind of a list of 20 questions that folks were interested in, and then kind of in the same breath, you mentioned that it was possible to open up your web services for SQL queries. But there's a gap between folks who can run SQL queries and who can ask these kinds of questions. Yes. Are you thinking at all about how to bridge that gap?
Right now, we have 2 students trying to get, for each question of those, we started to order them in easy to answer and more complicated to answer. We may even have questions that we can't answer right now. But we have some students trying to figure it out for this specific question, which kind of service do I need, and trying to implement atomic web services. For example, for the first question, I can just have a web service that say, okay, I'm going to give you a location, and the web service is going to return me an array containing the precipitation for that location in a particular time period. If we have this web service, we already have these web services running, we can create a simple application that works with that can add that. For some of them, we know that we are not going to be able to answer. For example, the third from the bottom is a very specific web service. We can just write that to answer that and try to parameterize that. But some of these questions, we think we are not going to be able to answer with that. for example, comparison and locate which is similar to which in respect to something, we are going to get closer to the data. So we have some idea, but we haven't tackled that yet.
Thanks. Other questions before? Great. Well, thank you, Rafael.
Thank you.